Okay, so I appreciate everyone's time today. We're going to talk about email security, business email compromise, and hopefully choosing the right email security vendor for you. Things have definitely evolved. I'm sure you've all seen, God, in the last few years, how things have increased dramatically. We've certainly seen a huge uptick in socially engineered attacks at an email level. And they're getting smarter, right? You know, we would go back to the days we were all talking about anti-spam and, you know, years and years ago, that was a big thing, but the reality was it was the big shotgun approach, send loads of emails out and hopefully make a few bucks along the way. Nowadays, they've realized they can be much more targeted with that, use social engineering, understand about individuals, organizations they're trying to target, and make them much smarter from the way they land. And they land very well. You've also seen that we've all had an uptick in trying to use some sort of training for staff to get them to understand what this looks like. I think the last time I saw it was about a 26% click-through still on training. So users are still clicking on stuff they shouldn't click on at quite an alarming rate, and it's not changing, right? And I would say the amount of money that's been spent on training for people has dramatically increased to what it used to be, but it's still sitting around the same area of numbers. So either it's not working, or the attackers are getting smarter, or it's a combination of the two. It's probably a combination of the two. You know, we would all understand that most of us wouldn't expect if a malicious email came into our mothers or fathers, they're probably not going to be able to understand whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. It's the same with people in an office environment. They're not security engineers. They're not specialists in this area. This is not what they do. So as we've seen this massive shift into cloud infrastructure, as we're moving away from on-prem servers, you know, we've seen a huge change, certainly post-pandemic, moving up to cloud email. And with all these things, whenever there's a rush to get to something new, cloud email, security often takes a bit of a backseat, or it's not the first priority. We just need to get everything in the cloud and get it done. Obviously, that's accelerated with the fact Microsoft is end-of-lifing all of on-prem, so it's going to happen that way. And the reality is, I think most of us in our early careers, if we've ever been an administrator of a system and had to administer an Exchange server, nobody's sad to see that go away, right? It's nice to have it all in one place where it's easy enough to deal with. And I guess these are still the two big players, right? Microsoft, I would say, is probably 90% of what we see, maybe 10% Google Workspace. It varies a little bit. But as I was saying earlier, you know, the impact of things we used to see over the years, it was very low impact, but, you know, either Nigerian prince or whatever it might be, these sort of things, they all went round and you only had to get one person and they were making money, so it was all good. That's dramatically increased. Like the value of the attacks that are coming in now that we're seeing have gone up dramatically. If you look at the last FBI report, I don't know if it was in the last presentation, I know the lady was talking about that, $2.6 billion in North America is lost to business email compromise. Always sounds great because everyone goes, oh, look at this. Obviously, it's an American number. The interesting thing is if you read that data sheet and go through, the next country on the list is the UK. And the UK equates to the next 20 countries in combination on that list. So we are very much number two, and a big number two in terms of this. It may be an English language thing, it might be where the financial institutions are, but the UK is absolutely a big target, and it's working. They're making money, right? You know, interesting when you look at that $2.4 billion on the FBI report, ransomware is about 200 million. So in terms of what we hear a lot about, which is ransomware, it's a tiny amount compared to business email compromise. And we were thinking about that ourselves, you know, certainly the UKI team going, well, why do we hear that? And it really comes down to GDPR rules. You know, if you're compromised from a perspective of you lose customers' data or users' data, you've got to tell the world about it. Someone screws up and pays a £10,000 invoice by mistake. As long as you can pay the bill, life goes on, right? It's embarrassing, you feel stupid, but you don't need to tell anyone you did it. You know, we've spoke to government agencies both in the UK, US, and other areas. They'll all be the first to put their hands up because we know we've paid the bad guys. We just want to stop doing it. You know, they get through on these sort of procurement emails. So the evolution has gone through the roof. The price to companies has gone through the roof. That is out of step, so we will keep going past. What's happening there? If we look at it, it's that socially engineered. You know, we put a lot of data on the internet nowadays, right? Everyone knows a lot about us, a lot about our organizations, a lot about supply chain. We've seen that's quite a big attack vector now where, you know, it's harder to go after what's the poster child we used to talk about, Maersk. You don't want to get murked, right? You know, they're very smart. They're spending a lot of money on security. They're doing a really good job. But their suppliers may not be. People they buy their containers from, people they do this from. You know, those are the companies that may not be spending that kind of money. So third-party attacks have absolutely gone through the roof. It's much easier to go after those people. Account takeovers, Huge increase, 600% increase, nearly 700% increase. And I know there's always used to be the thing people always talked about. They're going, yeah, but we use two-factor, we're doing all this, it's never going to happen. Hopefully you all have seen the most recent one about Uber. Two-factor authentication was enabled. The attack was specifically targeted by spamming them loads of emails, getting someone to approve it to get into their ecosystem. So there are many ways that attackers are getting around two-factor authentication. It's a good thing to do. And I say to anyone I give a presentation to or demo to, if I tell you nothing and you learn nothing from it, move away from push notifications and go back to those challenge responses. It feels like you're actually requesting it and the users are engaged. It's not just a yes. I had a healthcare professional that was at a conference in the US during one of our POVs. Had his Apple Watch, authenticator was going off, and one of these things you just kept going, yeah. 12 times as we were in the middle of a POV, and luckily we caught it, blocked it, and it was all good. The funny thing was, that person then came back from the conference, ran to the IT department and bitched about it. Went, this is crazy, this doesn't work. And they're like, no, it does. You just kept letting a hacker in. So, and these things, again, he's not a security expert. We had a conversation about this at one of our town halls recently, and our CEO was working for Twitter for a long time in their data analytics team. And he worked with the Uber team. He goes, they're smart guys. They're the A-game security players. They know exactly what they're doing, but they got compromised. So there are lots of things that attackers are doing which, laziness isn't the right word, but get on that fatigue of users just going, yeah, it's fine. I personally think the whole AIM, IDAM, all the rest of it is going to change slightly. At the moment, we're still in that. Most products are still going to go to you. Do you want to authenticate? Not what, not why, not when, just do you want to, yes or no? We don't know. If it came up and said, hey, you're trying to log into Salesforce, you're trying to log into O365, we might think about that. So I think that's what will start evolving over the years. Impersonation of automated systems and individuals. The automated systems is really on the increase, and that's really, show of hands, who's all had an email recently going, if you want to keep your password, click here. Yeah, exactly. It's everywhere at the moment. Other ones with, hey, Joe shared a Teams document with you. Joe shared a SharePoint document with you. Loads of these systems, because they look legit. People use these tools. There's a great one, I can't remember the name of it now, but I can literally take you to GitHub, and in 5 minutes we can download this phishing tool that will absolutely look like Amazon. It will send you an email with all the beautifulness going, your package is about to be delivered. Click here to track it. You click it, you put your password in. It looks very, very good. And we've tried that in demos that we've done with customers. It works really, really well. So the socially engineered part of impersonating systems is getting much, much better. And the problem is we use more online services now because of the pandemic, and we're all a lot more online savvy. So these sorts of emails are very regular. You get that fatigue of going, yeah, it must be fine. I'm just going to click it. So this has dramatically gone up. Here was the FBI report I was talking about. So like I said, 2.4, it's actually 2.6 at the moment, $2.4 billion in business email compromise, and you can see how much that's increased. This is a significantly lucrative revenue stream for the attackers, right? They are 100% realizing this makes good money. And the problem is a lot of the phishing, if you look at the way email security has evolved over the years, phishing, whatever it might be, these emails that are coming in, it's always relied on that known bad. What's bad? I've got a list of bad IPs, a list of bad users, a list of bad URLs, bad domains. Problem with that is it's like looking in your rearview mirror for an accident you're going to crash into. It's not happening. What has evolved, and I think this is the best way to explain how email security is evolving, if you think about the days when we all had Symantec, McAfee, and another antivirus engine on our desktop, every morning they update the signature file, and we were all happy, right? That's just the way we did things. That was the known bad. EDR's moved that needle. It's now looking at behavior. What is it trying to do? What is the application that's going to be launched? What's the macro? What are these things trying to do in my environment? Now, obviously, when you're using machine learning to model computers, it's a little bit easier because computers only have so many instruction sets. There's only so much they can do. You can build some very cool tooling around that, and it's really, really changed how things are done. And if you think about it now, I've worked with a lot of the big EDR platforms over the years, and to see Microsoft now being quite a serious player in that, I think 5 years ago we'd all laugh if we said Microsoft and security in the same sentence. They do a great job, right? They've really moved on from that, and that's again moving to that profiling. The problem is things like safe links, things like other URL protection. They're typically doing that URL rewrite. Is it bad? If it's bad, sandbox it or pigeonhole it. The problem is a lot of those bad links aren't active for 72 hours. So the defanging bit may happen 3 days later. So everyone's got this nice feeling that, oh, it's okay, it's behind a safe link, it's fine. But actually, most of this stuff we see in terms of phishing, malware, whatever it might be, they know it's going to last 48 hours max. They're not expecting these links to last very long. So they know 48 hours will just redo it. The beauty is if you're building these tools, you can even, some of them you could even put in your AWS account or Canva, whatever it might be, and it will build a unique page, a unique link every single time you send out this campaign. So they're incredibly smart. So this is only going to get worse. They're only going to get better at it. I would certainly say there's things that I've seen recently where the phishing ones have come through saying, Joe shared a document with you. One came through on a customer I was working with. Typically, it's a pop-up that comes up, and it's the OWA, OAuth for Microsoft, and it's bogus domain at rubbish.com. Most of us in the security world would go, that's not Microsoft. Even though they do a really good job sometimes of even capturing what your login page looks like for your company and gives your logo, it looks really good. Most of us in security would go, that's not Microsoft. One I saw recently that was an HTML file in the email. When you opened it up, the pop-up was an iframe inside that. So it had CSS style sheets, it looked like a pop-up, and the URL said oauth.microsoft.com. It looked really legitimate. Even I went, oh, hang on, we might have a false positive here, this might be fine. Now, obviously, I'm not going to be able to look at the nearly 80,000 signals we look in every email conversation. But when you look at those and really get into the weeds, you realize, actually, no, we were right. It just looks really, really good. So these things are really increasing over the years, and it's quite significant in how much they are increasing. We know BEC's got a higher ROI for the users, so return on investment for hackers is high. They're making good money out of this. Social engineering is very effective. We know that in all kinds of things we've seen, not just in terms of phishing and spam and all the rest of it. You know, there are all kinds of scams that are in Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all those things. Social engineering is much more effective because it feels it's about me or my organization. And we've seen that the traditional focus on known bad just doesn't work, right? You know, we can all have a big list, but it's still that looking in the rearview mirror. If you look at a normal secure email gateway solution, they're not normally API integrated, meaning they're a bump in the wire, they're an MTA. Whether that's in the cloud or whatever they call it, it's still part of the MTA routine. So they don't link directly into O365. They've got very limited east to west, meaning internal emails, because it's obviously not going through the gateway. You can configure some segs to look at internal emails, but very few I know that do routing to be able to do that kind of activity. You don't have any context around the email. You know, typically they're looking at these emails as they come along on the MTA conveyor belt, pick them up, look at them, anything I know bad about that. If it is, quarantine it, block it, whatever it might be, and then pass them on. But they're only looking at these ones in isolation. So it's looking against those databases. You know, so you've got no internal context. You don't know what people normally do in your environment because you're not looking at east to west. It's very much rules and policies based, you know, looking at what's going on there. It's looking at those known bad indicators. There's no vendor context. You don't know businesses you're doing business with. You don't get these really good signals you get from an API integration like sign-in events, location, failed attempts, useful information to know about users. And there's no visibility into that compromised account because we just don't know if it's behaving badly. And obviously having an API means you've got access to all of either O365, G Suite. There are thousands of signals you can pull out of that. We've seen lots of organizations, you know, they're sort of happy with this bit, you know, they get that and they're very aware all these things down here just aren't being really addressed by their current secure email gateway provider. Another issue we've seen over the years is people are reluctant to change their secure email gateway provider, typically because there's quite a big deployment cost to that, changing MX records, moving things, routing. You know, in theory, if you screw something up there, it can stop everyone's email working and you're going to get shouted at. It's not worth doing. So actually just people picking different secure email vendors and doing a proof of concept doesn't happen very often because it's just too complicated to do it. And there's quite complex administration around that. So people can spend a huge amount of time configuring these rules and policies in their secure email gateways. They often get themselves tied up in all kinds of knots because it gets really complicated. But there's an incredible headache and overhead on the users to deal with that. And they can be really very noisy with false positives. And you get that typically, you're all familiar with the either the digest email or the quarantine email. At the end of the day, there's out of these 100 emails, there's 10 that are in the too hard bucket. Can you make the decision? Typically, we make bad decisions, right? So you don't want users doing that. If we look at a typical supply chain one, for example, there's liquidation request. This is the email that's coming from John, going to Steve. Hey, Steve, can you do the amount? Can you process it today? There's no links, there's no attachments, so there's nothing in terms of known bad there for traditional email security to look at. And where do the segs have problem? They're only looking for known bad. For the most part, there are some things they do. I would be remiss to say they don't do some things. Very little relationship context. They just don't understand how these users typically interact. You're not looking at the tone or the content of the analysis. I'll go into that in more depth because that's the secret sauce. That's the hard stuff. And you're relying on those known bad IOCs, of which there are none. So there's nothing really for them to latch onto. These text-based emails land in mailboxes 99.9% of the time. We see them a lot. Certainly ones. Have you all seen ones recently, the payroll one? They look for people that's new on your payroll or new to the company, send an email into payroll going, I've just joined, I've changed bank details, can you update them? You'd be amazed how many of those are successful. I had one, I was talking to a customer during a POV. One landed, and we do this, what we call a care report. So the first care report we deployed, first one I showed was a normal user asking for their payroll to be changed. They went, we would never fall for this one. We got a process in place. I was like, great. The next one I showed them was the CFO asking that same question. Nobody wanted to upset the CFO, so they changed it manually. I'm like, the one guy you shouldn't do this for, you went outside of the policy. So it's, humans make mistakes. Policies are great, it's one of those things. Look at it from our perspective of what we're doing differently. And again, this comes down to, as I said at the part, the difference between the old AV signatures to the EDR platforms, from the signature-based email to this behavioral-based email. We are looking for identity. We're looking at these individuals. Do we see this individual? Have we seen that domain before? Do we normally talk to them? Is it a vendor we do business with? Who talks to that vendor typically? Loads and loads of different signals we look at. This domain was set up less than a year ago. That doesn't seem to make sense for this kind of vendor. Then you start getting to the natural language processing and computer vision techniques. So natural language processing, you're all very familiar with. We can look at that and understand what's built up of that. It's a request to engage. It's a money amount, personal information, allocation, financial information. There's some urgency, today's date, and this is the user. So there's a lot of tonality and context in there to understand what's going on inside that. This is the hard bit. As I said, with EDR platforms, computers only have so many instruction sets, so many things they can do, you can build better models. We all talk to each other very differently. We talk to people differently that we work with, vendors we engage with, family members, whatever it might be. This is really hard. This is why having the abnormal team, sort of half of our founders came from the security space, so Proofpoint and areas like that, and the other half came from the ad tech space. As I said, our CEO used to work at Twitter. They are very good at understanding what is the intent of something. We all know here, if we even think about taking the family to Center Parcs tomorrow, the internet is going to advertise that to me everywhere. Okay? And that's exactly what they were doing. They were building these relationships, these model databases to understand what is the intent, what is it trying to get me to do. Another good reason for this being, let's just assume there was a link. And like I said to you earlier, links are notoriously very unique and last 24, 48 hours. Even if there was a link, it doesn't really matter whether you know if the link is bad. What's this telling me? Why would I click this link? What's it trying to get? Why would it make me click an attachment? Why would it make me click on that link? That's the important thing, is understanding that. And then on top of that, we do something very unique, which is vendor-based. So we look at vendors you do business with. We understand that typical way you interact with those vendors. We understand the sort of banking details you typically send invoices to. So we'll know when this is outside of the norm. So you can imagine we go back from this known bad, we don't know much about it, to all this context we have about it. And not only do we do the natural language processing, same with documents as images. If you're familiar with computer vision, it's probably the new buzzword, but best way to explain it, if you've ever been in a guy's Tesla and it goes, there's a dog, there's a car, there's a bush, there's a this, that's computer vision. It's understanding what's in this image, document, whatever it might be. So we're using some of that techniques as well. So how do you make this work? What we're seeing, and Gartner's talking about this, and I'll talk about it a bit more, this integrated cloud email security, how can we make it much more seamless? So in this case, we integrate via the API. There's no need to change MX records. You don't need to change your existing security. You don't change your workflow. You don't change anything. We look at the emails when they land in O365 or Google Workspace. What that means is so many more people we speak to are more than happy to do a proof of concept because we're not going to break anything. We land purely read-only, we sit in there, and we provide them with a report. And typically it's quite eye-opening, because all their security is still in place. So when we come up with that report and say, here, there's the 4,000 messages we would have blocked, these are malicious, it's a bit of a concern when they go, well, we've got all this tooling at the front end that isn't blocking these emails. And that's because, they're really sort of sitting in this area of business. All this more complicated stuff is incredibly difficult to do. So from our perspective, we're cloud native, we're direct APIs into both G Suite and Exchange Online. We also have full visibility into east to west, so we understand relationships internally. So let's say you did have an account takeover. If an internal user starts doing strange things, we can absolutely alert on you. One of the examples we give in our demo platform, and all the examples we give in our demo platform either came from real-world customers or POV prospects. One of them was an internal user was popped. They sent an invoice in to two of their team saying, I want to pay this invoice. And the invoice is for $1.1 million. Apparently for this company, that is not a large amount, and no one even questioned it. And when we asked them, okay, well, we would have blocked this. Why do you think it's okay? They looked at it and went, well, the invoice itself is not a huge amount, so wouldn't cause too many red flags, but we always have a process, and we've already talked about processes. Cash transfer request document needs to be created and all the assumed workflows with it. And obviously you can see in that email, here's the document, cash transfer request, all signed off, all approved. And it wasn't until they looked at it, they realized there's like 2 sections that their users would normally fill in to do it. And actually this hacker filled out everything perfectly because he or she was looking at a $1.1 million payday. They really spent a lot of time on this and made it look really legitimate. So even when we showed them that, they were like, oh, yeah, that doesn't look legitimate. And then we went into the depths of explaining to them, look, we've also got this sign-on event. We talked about earlier these unusual sign-ons. And if you've ever seen that in O365, they can be noisy, right? Because users do use VPNs, they do travel quite a lot. The beauty of us linking into that and into your email is we can tell you out of the 700 other emails this individual sent, they've never sent one from Hong Kong. So this suspicious sign-on event, coupled with that, is much higher fidelity. This is a big problem. So we can look into these things. And again, we blocked it for them, but it's definitely these kinds of relationships that you just don't see in other areas. So looking at the context is important, looking at the behavior, understanding what's the intent of the email, and then looking at those deep signals. We can get a lot of information out of email when you're connected directly into O365. So, like I said, we can work in many scenarios. There are lots of, sometimes I think 40% of people will keep some sort of secure email gateway. They may actually reduce a lot of the security spend on that because they might be using it for business continuity, archiving, and or another. And that's probably the time we see most times a SEG would stay in place. But certainly what we're seeing a huge shift to is that native email security from O365, right? CISOs, CIOs, people like that are spending a significant amount of money with Microsoft now. They want to sweat that E3, E5 license. So you have to justify, why am I spending money that Microsoft can already do? And they do a pretty good job on that perimeter protection, right? Looking for the known bad, blocking these things. And in fact, we're partnered really tightly with Microsoft. We're part of their MISA and their AI Inner Circle platform. And I think on the latter one, there's probably only about 5 or 6 companies worldwide that are in that. So we're really proud of that. But if anyone goes to Microsoft going, we're going to use you for security, what about a business email compromise? They will say, look at abnormal. So we're really proud of that. So it's sort of 2 scenarios we see the most of. Like I said, it's not that SEGs don't stay in place. Sometimes they do, but typically it's not because they want to keep the security. It's because they want to use business continuity, archiving, whatever it might be. So when you look at our platform, the beauty is you can quickly deploy this. You can do a proof of concept with us very, very quickly. There's not a huge amount of effort going in. It literally is a 30-second, we send you a link, you log it in. We're looking for that good versus known bad. So we will then retrospectively look back 45 days in your email environment and understand how people interact. How do people talk to vendors? How do people talk to each other? In external emails that are coming, what's that baseline of good behavior as opposed to that known bad? We've got a much bigger comprehensive coverage. We are looking at all the different types of attacks because we've got so much more data. We're not just looking at one email in isolation. And obviously we've got that native API integration. It literally is a 30-second integration. Doesn't take long. And it's not just us that's saying this, right? Gartner is saying the same thing now. They're going, they've created this market guide for email security. The world is evolving. What they used to do for email security has changed. As people are moving to the cloud, as they're changing the way they're doing it, they do require a reevaluation of email security processes. How are we going to do things differently? And their first thing they talk about is exactly what we talked to you about. It's a new approach, moving away from these traditional segs, going more into this ICAS, the integrated cloud email security. The API approach, which is easy to evaluate. You can get much better detection because of the signal base we've got. You're looking at thousands of different signals. And they integrate with the platform. It's not just SMTP-based MTA stuff they're looking at. This is absolutely the platform. And we know, don't get me wrong, we've been talking about SPF, DKIM, DMARC for years, right? And in theory, if everyone tomorrow did the right thing and started using that correctly, the world would be a much better place. If any of you have ever tried to turn on strict DMARC to block stuff, it's normally quite bad. You stop getting a lot of emails from people you actually want to do business with. So granted, it will make things better, but a lot of the attacks we see now are coming from Gmail or whatever it might be. Their SPF, DKIM, and DMARC is all green. Everything about it is legitimate. So the attackers aren't stupid. They are going to use emails that are legitimate and work better. And obviously into that email security, and this is something I think has moved, previous to this I was doing network detection and response and the whole XDR platforms. One thing we hear a lot of both at Abnormal and then was this greater orchestration, greater automation, being able to do things quickly. Not having to rely on a SOC to make a decision that could be 24, 48, 72 hours later, whatever it might be, having that full orchestration that means that these things can be blocked very, very quickly. So, appreciate that. Well, I'll do a Q&A in a second, but for us, if anyone's interested and wants to see what this looks like, I've done this quite a lot with a few organizations. There's no commitment from you to us other than plug it in, see what's going on. It's that one-click integration. We will work with you, give you a link to integrate to your O365 tenant or G Suite. Like I said, we then spend that next 6 days doing that retrospective look back, understanding that normal behavior, and then a week later we provide you what we call a care report, which shows you hopefully all the bad that's still landing in users' mailboxes. And like I said, we've certainly seen some significant, I've not done one yet where we've not seen something quite significant with users. I had one very early. I've been with Abnormal now since January. Very early into my career here, we did an event like this. The guy's like, I've just renewed Mimecast. It sounds great, but it's just not the right time. I said, look, free evaluation, just see what happens. Literally dropped it in. A month later, he said, I can't unsee all the bad that's still in my environment. I've got to do something about it. So, we'll age off whatever seg they're using at the time and go to us full. But they did buy our product at the end. So this is often a big eye-opener. Certainly, one thing we like to do with all of our customers is do what we call a BVA, a business value assessment. So we can actually give you all of the stats. Because a lot of times organizations are going, yeah, it's great, but we don't actually have this part of budget, whatever it might be. Often it's really interesting when you can look at, what the significant impact to the organization is. Some of these emails have financial values to them if someone did click or had clicked on them. You'd be amazed the amount of times we see, brain's gone. Users actually interacting, that's the word, interacting with these malicious emails. Time and time again, we get people. One thing I've seen very recently, and I don't know if any of you have seen it, seems to be sort of leveraging a supply chain attack where they'll email organization going, hey, can you tell me about the remittance information? I want to know, what do we owe you? Which most organizations will go, yeah, fine, here you go, you owe us this. Why wouldn't you? It's not, it's not particularly dangerous, but you want to get paid. Problem is, a lot of these attackers will spoof that to get that information so they can start piecing together company A owes company B, owes company C, and they know financial information about the supply chain. And then they'll start impersonating company B and sending you an invoice for it. I had one very recently. Supplier was compromised. Hacker went through the supplier, found a great document in their email called outstandinginvoices.xls, found the highest value amount and submitted it to the organization. We were in a POV with this company at the time, insurance, assurance type business. Came in and it was about 60K, it wasn't a huge amount, £60,000 sort of thing. And we flagged it straight away in the POV and said, don't pay this, this isn't legitimate, we're sure this is compromised. The SOC team and the finance team came back to us and went, no, you've got this one wrong. We've checked, we do business with this company, the invoice is right, the amount is right, everything about this is right, this is a false positive. It wasn't until we got the customer and the vendor on a call together, we said, we think you got an email problem with Joe Blogger's email, that the vendor went, oh yeah, we have had a compromise, you can disregard that. So it even goes to prove that SOC teams and all this, we all make mistakes, right? The point is how much data you can work on. One of the things we see a huge amount of is automation of abuse mailbox. So your phishing mailbox, your users report phishing at yourdomain.com. The SOC team spend hours on those, and they really are a big problem, because if you're spending, I think on average, the last one I talked to someone about was 600 messages a month. They had 2 people looking at that. They worked out for a week, it was about 1 full day's worth of work for these 2 people a week. And actually during the POV with this customer, they actually said to us, we've gone back and we've checked your stats in your abuse mailbox system. You flagged 97 as malicious. The SOC team agreed with you on 90 of them. But then they went back and look again. They agreed with you on all 97. To my amazement, the CISO then said to you, saying my SOC team is 6% ineffective. I was like, no, I'm not saying that. It's hard. These things are really hard and people make mistakes. But the reality is, this happens, right? These get through, and some of them look very, very legitimate. Any questions? Appreciate your time. Yes?
Martin Tarnowski. So obviously you're a email security organization.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of technologies out there that do similar, or they all you need is one way or another. As an email security company, how do you tackle the problem of there's this 1% of the communication passing through your own technology, as an example? And we know that the end user is the last line of defense in many cases.
Mm-hmm.
How do you tap into the user conscience to trigger that something is an alert that, you may not know that something passed through your technology, they may not know, but how do you tap into the conscience to say you should be vigilant? What are the things that you tell your employees to make sure that, we have technology, it isn't perfect, the email security is difficult, and the attacks are more sophisticated. We had Nina talking about the AI,
Mm-hmm.
and we had Ian Murphy talking about walking people through the email security or through the security like you would walk a child across the street. What do you guys do to improve that where the technology fails and you have the user who is the last person that can potentially spot something before something bad happens?
So I talked about it at the start. I don't know if you're at the very start. So
no, I wasn't.
That's fine. So we do absolutely work with partners that do training in that regard. The problem is, I said it earlier, the click rate has been about 26% for so long now, where users just click through. So, that minutiae of, don't get me wrong, we're not perfect. We will not get 100%. I'd love to say we could. We have the highest rate in the business. People like, one message in 1.2 million messages is our false positive rate. So it's a huge number. Those kinds of ones, no matter what training you get, if they're so advanced, users aren't going to do it. What we're trying to do is always make sure our efficacy is so high the users never see the emails. We want to get rid of them. And that's why we don't do things like digest emails going, we're not sure about these, can you make a decision? In 99% of our installations, there's a few things you can do in terms of remediation. Tell the user, put a banner on. God knows users don't want to see another banner, but you can put another banner on, or delete the email. And certainly in O365, that puts it into purges, so they never have to touch it. I'd say 99% of our customers just go, delete the email. I don't want the users interacting with it. So I hear what you're saying, but the reality that we've seen in most people, that the training side of things just isn't working. We should absolutely do it. People need to understand and do it, and I think it will be going on for some time. But the reality is it has failed.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the kind of assurance or awareness about security. I think we put a lot of money in the technology. But I don't think we understand how we work as human beings, because no matter how many hours, how many slides, how many talks we have with an organization, say these are the indicators of compromise. This is what you should do, even if you don't understand why the email arrived. We still don't know how to deliver the message to make people more vigilant and report the things.
I think the reality is, you look at most businesses, IT exists for the business to exist. They're not an IT company like we all are and a few of us are. Well, we work in IT, we get security. They might be a manufacturing company. They use email, they use web, whatever it might be, but they make steel. That's what they do. That's what their job is. You didn't hire them because they're cybersecurity experts. You hired them because they're good at this. They're good salespeople. They're good this. They're good that. And that comes down to the reality of it. They're not subject matter experts. So You need something that's going to be smart enough to stop them getting those emails. And hopefully that's what we do.
Yeah, we revolutionize the technology, but we don't really revolutionize how we approach people to teach them more.
No, exactly. It was interesting the point you made earlier. I've heard a few of those people talking about weaponizing AI to attack people now. And I was at an event a couple of months ago now, and there was an ex-spooky person there, let's call him that. There's no evidence to prove they're using AI in malware and machine. And the reason he goes, it's too easy to do it this way. Why would you make it hard? Just do it this way. They're falling for this easy stuff. We're not going to make it hard for ourselves. So I'm not saying it's not coming. It absolutely will. But the amount of manpower that goes into this stuff and building code that works, you know, I've seen dozens of phishing emails that have come through. They look really good. Someone screwed up. The link isn't right. It just goes to s3.aws.com. You're like, you should have fanged that one as opposed to defang. It doesn't go anywhere. But you can see a lot of these things, the scripts they make for these ransomware or these phishing attempts that go through, if they don't get the script right, if they don't get the code right, it doesn't inject the bad bit in there. So I've seen quite a few of those. Any other questions? Am I at time? Is that what you're saying? I am. Sorry. We are out here if anyone needs us, so please come and talk to us, but I really appreciate your time. Thanks very much.